I think there's been a real transformation in the U.S.-India relationship if you think about it historically. If you go back even just 15, 16 years, people in the United States tended really not to think very much about India at all. And so in elite foreign policy opinion, people thought about India largely in the narrow context of South Asia, usually hyphenated with Pakistan. And people in corporate boardrooms and in the private sector in the United States tended not to think very much about India. It really wasn't in their consciousness. And that's really changed utterly, and the big structural impediments have been removed. The first was the Cold War, because the Cold War, and in particular India's non-alignment in the context of the Cold War, did not fit easily with American conceptions of world order. So as India, after 1991, began to reassess its own strategic choices, it created opportunities to pursue complementary agendas that had not existed prior to that. The second impediment really was the complete lack of economic content to the relationship. And so economic reform and economic change in India created opportunities for Americans and Indians to build a common economic agenda, American investment into India, frankly, Indian investment into the United States, whether it's SR buying Minnesota Steel or it's the trade figures, which really have ballooned. India is one of the fastest growing export markets for the United States. So removing that set of structural impediments facilitated a whole new area of cooperation. And then the third impediment was really the nuclear issue, because I think particularly in India, it was seen as a kind of hypocrisy by Americans to talk about pursuing a strategic partnership with India on the one hand, while maintaining the position that the United States had on the nuclear issue on the other. And so that really in many ways was critical, because it removed the last and in some ways the biggest obstacle to a closer partnership. So with President Obama coming here, he took office and he's presiding over a period of U.S.-India relations where there's an opportunity to build a relationship without those impediments there. There are three things to be said. The first is that the U.S.-India relationship is really a lot bigger than the government-to-government relationship. And in a way, that's a reflection of the maturity of it. It's, the business relationship, the students, scholars, non-resident Indians who live in the United States. In a lot of ways, that's been the driver of the relationship. And that will continue on a really positive and frankly very rapid trajectory, irrespective of what happens between the two governments. So that's one piece of really just undeniably terrific news about the relationship. The second thing to say is that there are some disagreements. And I think particularly, people tend to talk about climate, they talk about trade, sometimes they talk about China, they talk about arms control. But the biggest one, let's face it, is Afghanistan and Pakistan. And that has really bedeviled the relationship a little bit, particularly in President Obama's first year. But, at the end of the day, I think that's something the two governments need to have a very frank conversation about, and I think that's happening. But, in some ways, the challenge is going to be to manage those disagreements toward at least a shared understanding of the problems that are faced. And then third, I would say that really what makes the U.S.-India relationship unique in some ways is that it's begun to burst the boundaries of South Asia. If you think about India, you mentioned Afghanistan, I mentioned Pakistan. If you think about the U.S.-India relationship only in that context, it inevitably draws your attention away from this other set of issues, and that issues includes assuring a favorable balance of power in Asia writ large, supporting and sustaining global growth, promoting market-based economic policies, assuring the global commons. These things, a relationship that's more Asian and more global, and not just totally focused on the challenges of India's strategic geography. A strategic partnership is a relationship that's based on shared strategic interests and complementary goals, and you build a partnership on the basis of that shared set of strategic interests and a shared strategic frame of reference. And frankly, in the past, the United States and India didn't have that. Today, over a course of a decade, the United States and India have developed a set of shared strategic concerns in many ways and on many issues, a shared set of strategic vulnerabilities, and they're trying to build a partnership on that basis. And so to me, that's what a strategic partnership is, and that's why I think we have one. You got to look at the menu of issues that we're working on in the defense area, in the security area, issues that touch really the underlying balance of power in Asia, but also essentially the future of the global economy and of the global system. And on that, the United States and India really have a lot of common interests and shared strategic goals. And we don't always have complementary policies. And so the challenge, I think, really of the partnership is to turn common interests into complementary policies on the widest possible menu of issues.